Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Addictive Culture Podcast. This is going to be a little bit of a car podcast because I'm driving right now to get my wife some ice cream while she puts the kid to bed. Yeah, I just wanted to take a second because, admittedly, I was watching some debates on YouTube between Christians and atheists, and I came across the new video by Alex O'Connor where he had Cliff and Stewart on and debated them about what was essentially a debate on morality. Is God moral to the same statutes that he holds humans to morality of? And the thing that he was talking about specifically in this episode of his YouTube was about genocide in the scriptures. One of the specific ones, which has become a hot subject for atheists this year especially, is the genocide of the Canaanites. You can go read those stories in the Old Testament if you feel so compelled. We're not going to do that right now. I just wanted to share a few things that I believe are really crucial when you're looking at those stories and those things that have happened in history, when you're looking at them in the Bible. And I think that they're really pertinent right now because we have a couple of series going on with this ministry right now. We have the Job series, Job chapters 1 and 2 from Hebrew to English, and that's going to be the first episode this Saturday. But secondly, we also have a series going on right now on the Beatitudes, which just started. The launch of that is going to be in text format if you go to the community page of this ministry on this YouTube, or if you go into the description of my YouTube channel, you'll find the link to my blog there, where you'll find more sermon-like postings. And we're going to be going through the Beatitudes, creeping through. I have hundreds of pages of notes on the Beatitudes from my studies this year. And I'll share probably just the ones that I feel are most compelling. And I think probably in the distant future, if I feel so compelled, I'll put up all of the notes that I have just in one kind of monster post on my blog. But then we also have a little series going on right now on tithing and how tithing in the modern day perspective is unbiblical. And that one specifically, the Beatitude series, but primarily the tithing series, uh, you're going to hear me and you're going to read as I mention quite a lot of things through Leviticus, Exodus, and Numbers. And that's kind of within the same timeline as what Alex O'Connor is talking about here with the Canaanites. And so I just think it's pertinent to comment on this. Uh, we can't look at ancient texts, and this is the problem I have with so many atheists. Like I have talked to so many atheists that it kind of just it shocks me. It never ceases to amaze me how an atheist looks at something and looks at it through a lens of this modern day historical context for like the here and the now. And like, first of all, a large amount of modern society of our um, of our morality beliefs and our philosophical beliefs, our understanding of what's good and what's evil, as much as society here in America and in the West right now, there's a big movement, and I'm going to say primarily here in America, because that's the country that I live in. There's this huge boom right now where people want to act like morality is subjective or that it's based off of where you live, and that is just completely unfactual. It's just so off. In fact, so many of the things that we see as right from wrong in our current perspective come from the Christians of ancient Jerusalem and ancient Israel in the times after the resurrection of Jesus, where the church was absolutely booming because of his resurrection and the way that Christians have shaped the world with its sciences and philosophies and belief systems. And you don't have to take my words for that. I would encourage you to not take any philosopher or any biblical scholar's view on that, or any atheist scholar. I would encourage you to do the thing that most atheists don't do, at least of the ones I've met. And a lot of Christians don't do this either. So if you're an atheist, don't be so insulted. And that's that you go and you do this research for yourself, because this information is all very readily available for you with very credible sources, and you can even match certain sources. You can compare them to see how they're accurate and similar. And I say all of that because I want to bring up some key points. we can't look at the Old Testament and put our modern perspective on things. And secondly, I want to get this one out of the way as I'm just kind of talking right now without notes. It's very interesting to me, this belief system that people have. So if you don't believe in God, then you don't believe in a morality system. You can try to argue with me that you do, but you really don't. If there's no God who sets right and wrong, and this is determined fully, then right and wrong is fully subjective, and we know it's not, because we all know that murdering somebody's wrong in any culture. And we try to argue this from the mindset of, well, culture is just set that as wrong. Well, no, we all know that if I kill my neighbor and I eat him for survival, that's wrong. It's wrong even if it means I'm going to starve to death because I don't have the right to take another human being's life. And this is where the argument really comes in for atheists. And I understand the question. A lot of Christians show hate to this. I understand this question very, very well. Because if you're looking at it from the confused mindset of the rest of the world outside of Christians, and even a lot of Christians get this wrong, if you're outside of God and you're looking at these stories, I can understand where the confusion comes from. But we have to get one thing perfectly clear right away. If there is a God, and if you're trying to judge these stories based off of what you think has happened historically, which is that there was a genocide of people group, if you want to call it that, then we have to go off of the fact that the Bible also talks about God coming down in a pillar of fire and a pillar of clouds by day and by night to protect the Israelites, and that the enemy nations had witnessed this, and it was known that the God of Israel was with his people. And we don't know how God warned the Canaanites for 400 years that they're murdering of innocent children and melting them on the molten hot hands of their statue Moloch as they worship the false idol. We don't know how God warned them. God has performed signs and wonders for hundreds of thousands of years for the enemies of his people. I've seen miraculous things happen. And we look at the stories of the Israelites and what they were going through and what God would do for them, even in the midst of their complete stupidity and their complete rebellion of God. We know that for 400 years, whatever the case may be, however God did it, these people were warned that this God was very real. He was very angry with them, and he had warned them to stop, and they did not. And this is the very sad thing, right? Because we look at this from a humanistic perspective, and we say, oh, it's very sad that innocent children and women were killed at the hands of the Israelites because God commanded them to wipe out a very large number of the Canaanites. And, if we look at other quote unquote genocides in scripture, whatever the people group was that God had ordered the Israelites to attack, we look at this, and this is not simply just a war of the land, of who owns the land. This is God's people, and it's his redemptive story that he's setting up for Israel. And we're told that God made it very aware to these people groups that that land was the Israelites. It belongs to God because everything in this world belongs to God. Because if there's a creator of the heavens and the earth, everything on this heaven and earth belongs to him. And he's morally good because he sets what is morally right and what is morally wrong. He is a perfect being, which means that if he has a people group killed, we can't call that genocide because it's not genocide when God owns our souls and he chooses to do as he pleases with them. If he sees a wicked generation, which, by the way, he has done this even with his own people, Israel, and he does this even with Christians now. There are so many instances throughout history where God has allowed natural consequences for decisions to come. Christians go through suffering not based from God or because of Satan, but based solely on the fact that they made a mistake and they got natural consequences for it. God does punish people who have completely turned against him. We look at the things from the Israelites as they were in the wilderness. And I mean, come on, man, look at modern society here in just America alone right now, here in the West, even broader. We're making the same mistakes all over again. It's the killing of the innocent. It's the killing of God's people. And you could say, well, how is it different that God ordered the killing of children a killing of a people group, rather, as I should phrase, that led to the deaths of children, but it's not okay for there to be abortion laws for women who are suffering. The difference is that God owns human life, and the Israelites were his chosen and set aside people, and we don't have a society full of these mothers who have children who are sacrificing people on the molten hot hands of statues. This was a people group, and God ordered it to be wiped out because it was unclean. He held them to the standard of the law which he had put in place. He held the humans to it, and God kept to it as well, because the law was put there to show humanity that they couldn't make themselves cleansed on their own. They couldn't find their way on their own. They couldn't follow God just based off of commands. And that's why Christ comes and issues a covenant of mercy and not a covenant of sacrifice. And that's where we get to start contrast where people say, well, the God of the Old Testament is completely different from the God of the New Testament. Well, no, they're completely one and the same, and Jesus comes as the fulfillment of the law and God, and as God in human flesh. God can take a life, and he can order a life to be taken at any point. Notice how we don't have Christians who are ordered by God to run around and just kill innocent people. Look at what those nations were doing who were inhabiting the land flowing with milk and honey when the Israelites arrived. And look at the way throughout history that those people were warned. And then God comes and he finally brings and ushers his people into the land. And then they take it because it's theirs, and these people have been warned for so many years to stop their behavior, and then they don't. And God steps up, and the world gets mad when God doesn't do what they think that he should do, but then they get angry when God does the thing that's actually solving the problem. People were angry at Jesus because he came, and the people thought in his time that they should be able to divorce a wife for any reason that they had. And Jesus said, divorce is because of the weakness in your heart, and Moses permitted it because of that. And Moses was supposed to be a failure. He was the representation and the foreshadowing of Christ, but a broken reflection, because Jesus is the better prophet. He's the better Israel. He's the better sacrifice. He's the better covenant. He's the better explainer of the law than the prophets that came and they warned. But we also have to look at this just very openly. You have a people group that was burning alive children. Do you think for a second that they would have worked with the Israelites? That's God's land. At the end of the day, God ordered the killing of a people group that was doing heinous things. And I wouldn't look at that and say God's a hypocrite. I would look at that as the rest of society in a country right now here in America where we just voted for some states that abortion is completely fine and that we can take a human's life. Because even though it's a fetus, a fetus doesn't really have much more going for it than a newborn. A newborn doesn't have any thought. It doesn't really provide anything for society. It actually, for the parents, I can speak of this as a parent, children cause you to sacrifice, and they do cause you a suffering and a sorrow, but they're also beautiful and wonderful. But my 1-year-old doesn't offer anything for society. He just keeps us up at night. He screams and he hits, and he doesn't know how to regulate his emotions. And he's not some evil little sinner, but that is the effect of sin in the world. And my son is also a beautiful blessing. And even though he doesn't have any important thoughts that shape society and further it along in some great way, he is valuable because it's a human life, and we have the command from God to protect the innocent, to protect and to raise. And this comes for discomfort for some people, because you're like, well, why did God allow these women and children in the Old Testament and these mass killings of people to be killed? Why don't we, instead of we just look at that and just pointing the finger at God, I think the harder challenge for people, including Alex O'Connor, is look at what those people groups were doing and look at what they were supporting. Here's a uncomfortable statement that I'll make. You have women, and I understand women in that culture were frowned upon. They were looked down on. They were the lower of society. But we have women that are also in this society of men who are killing their children, and they're existing within that. And maybe some of them were against it. Maybe most of them were against it. But that's their society. Children were sacrificed as a joy to give to this God. The conscience of their heart with the law that's written on it, that's written on all people groups. If we look across the entire world, that murder is wrong everywhere. They were ignoring that. God stepped in and God took care of it. And they were not all wiped out. Not the Canaanites. Some of the nations were. And I think that's a serious thing. And I think we should look at that. And I think we should take note because God does not let wickedness pass. They don't just get off with a slap on the wrist and they don't just get off with a warning. God has promised to eradicate all wickedness from this planet. And every one of those children who were involved in those killings are in heaven because all souls belong to God. The wicked go to hell, but children who are above the age of accountability, they're in heaven. That's eternal life. That's the goal. That's the end result of where we're going at the end of this life. They were in a better place than the society that they were living in. Is it a shame that they were killed? And is that a sadness? And is that horrible to think about? Yes, from the perspective that death is not supposed to be a thing that happens for humans, but it's the result of sin. And it's the result of wickedness in people. And God stepped up and he provided the land for his people. And he wiped out nations that were warned of their wrongdoing. I wouldn't look at that and try to question God on his level of morality. I would look at that and take a deep look into your own heart and take a look at your morality. And that's what I think is one of the most interesting things about Alex O'Connor as an atheist, as an agnostic, or whatever he wants to call himself, as he tries to speak on his channel like he's open-minded and just wants to have discussion. He goes in there with the agenda of an unbeliever. And I would be very careful about the way we listen to these kinds of things and let these kinds of people influence us because God doesn't let wickedness go unpunished. He's patient and he's kind, not wanting that any shall suffer, but he's completely just and he will have the wicked suffer and he will remove them because they can't exist with his goodness at the same time. That's all I have for today. We're going to have more content coming out. Like I said, Saturday will be episode 1 of the book of Job from Hebrew to English, and I'll see you guys then.